Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name's Ian. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I have my top 25 books that I plan on reading in 2025. Very excited about this. I've gone back and forth on what books should and should not be on this list. I tried to be realistic while also challenging myself, which is a very sweet spot. You gotta find it and stick to it as best you can, and I have trouble with that because what inevitably happens to me is as soon as I put a book on a list of books that I plan on reading, the magic vanishes for some reason, and I suddenly don't want to read those books at all. I did very poorly in my 24 books to read in 2024. I think I maybe read 10, possibly. So the goal is to avoid that this time, while also forcing myself to read some books that I really want to read. It helps that I'm doing a Read What You Own challenge in 2025, so I'll be buying less books. Hopefully I can really dig into the ones I own. That's the plan, but we'll see how it goes. There's no rhyme or reason to these books either. I'm not going to be talking about them in specific genres. I'm just going to be talking about them. I have a large stack of books right here, and I'm just going to grab them and talk about them. Hope you enjoy. Before we get in, though, I would appreciate it if you would first let me know what books you're hoping to get to in 2025. Like, what's the one where you're like, I gotta get to this ASAP? Let me know. Number two, if you want to like the video or subscribe if you haven't already, that'd be great. Thanks. All right, let's jump in. First up, I'm just grabbing this book. Yeah, okay, short story collection, Exhalation by Ted Chiang. I really want to read this author. This is the one that I own, so I'm going to start with this one. There's also Stories of Your Life, I believe, that I also want to read very badly, but I got this one at Goodwill for like $1, and so I'm starting with this one. I know it's very sci-fi heavy, and his books, and his short stories, I should say, are renowned. He's supposed to be incredible, and I really enjoyed reading Ken Liu's short stories in 2024, so I'm really excited to try another sci-fi heavy short story writer, and I've heard nothing but good things about this guy, so very excited about this. Next up, we have a read-along that I am participating in, that being The Dragonbone Chair, aka Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. I will be reading book 1 in January, book 2 in February, and splitting up book 3 in March and April. This is a read-along that is being hosted by Josh over at Red Fury Books. I'll leave a link to his channel down below, but super excited to finally read my first Tad Williams. I say that. When I was a child, I picked up and read most of Tail Chaser's Song, which is a book that is about cats. And the reason I read it is because I was reading Warriors, which is a young readers series, and I just wanted more cat books, and so I picked that up. I don't know if I finished it or not. I don't really remember it, but this will be my first real exposure to Tad Williams, we're going to say. So very excited about this. I know very little about this, other than that it is a staple of the classic feeling fantasy genre. It's very much inspirational towards George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, so very excited about this. Intimidated slightly, but hopefully being a part of a buddy read / read along will make it easier to get into and through the series. Hey, speaking of my friend Josh over at Red Fury Books, I'm going to be reading The Given Day by Dennis Lehane, which was either his favorite book of the year or one of his favorite books of the year, or this series was. I know he loves Dennis Lehane. He has a great video doing a deep dive on Dennis Lehane's books, which if you know my channel, you know I love Dennis Lehane, so I'll leave that link down below to that video. Definitely check it out. It is totally worth watching, but I'm very excited to be getting into this Dennis Lehane series. It's the last of his series that I haven't touched. So I've read one book in his Kenzie and Gennaro series, and I do want to read more of those in 2025 as well, but my priority is to get to this trilogy. So I know this is historical fiction set in the 1900s, spanning quite a bit of time, I believe. I'm very excited about this. I think they're called the Coughlin books. I think it follows a specific family in America in the 1900s, probably in Boston, knowing Dennis Lehane. So yeah, very excited about this. I love anything Dennis Lehane writes, and I'm sure this will be no exception. Next up is A Song for Arbon by Guy Gavriel Kay. So this is an author that I swore I would get to in 2024, and I didn't. And this was actually the book that I said I was going to read by him. So I'm going to make it happen in 2025. So what I know about this author is that he writes very historical heavy fantasy books where it's low fantasy, not a lot of magic necessarily, and it's very heavily inspired by actual history, whether that be certain nations or certain wars or what have you. And this is one that is quite renowned, though is not necessarily his most popular. That is Tigana, I believe. So I'm very excited to force myself to finally read this author, because I know I'm going to enjoy his books. I just have a really good feeling about them. I've heard so many good things about this author from Josh over Red Fury Books, from Jake Bishop, from Kyle over at Read by Kyle, from so many people people seem to love his books, and I want to be a part of that conversation. So very excited to finally read a Guy Gavriel Kay. Next up, we have a work of nonfiction, which is by one of my favorite authors. That is Love Stories by Trent Dalton. I have been meaning to read this book for a couple of years now, and I really want to prioritize it, particularly in February, because it just fits the vibe. It does. So this is a collection of stories, nonfiction stories, written by Trent Dalton, but they're other people's stories. So essentially in 2020 or 2021, he went on a street corner with a typewriter and had a sign that basically asked people to tell him a love story, and these are the stories that he was told. People would come and sit down and tell him a story about love, and he wrote them in a book. And I think that is just the most heartwarming idea, and I want to read it because Trent Dalton is a magical writer. He is. He writes such wonder into his books, and I know that this is going to just be full of that, and I think that's a kind of story I need right now. So very excited about this. I love Trent Dalton, and I'm going to love stories. I know it. Next up, we have a book that I received in the mail from a dear friend of mine, that being Blood Over Bright Haven, that I received from Stacy over the chapter Conundrum. So thank you so much, Stacy, for gifting me this book for Christmas. I truly appreciate it. It's a beautiful book. Love the cover. Love the sprayed edges. And I really want to read this book. I read The Sword of Kaigen in 2023, and I really enjoyed it, and I have a really good feeling about this. I've heard quite a few people say they like it more than The Sword of Kaigen, and I really enjoyed Sword of Kaigen, but I think I'm going to like this one more. So I don't know too much about it other than that it's kind of like dark academia-y, and it's Emma Wong. So that's all I really need to know. Very excited about this one. Another book I was gifted that made my 25 to read in 2025 is from Jake over at The Bookish Drummer. So thank you, Jake, for The Har by David Sodergren. Sodergren. This is a wacky cover, dude. It is disturbing as heck, and I freaking love it. Yeah, so I don't know too much about this book, but I have a bunch of this author's books on my Amazon wishlist because I've heard so many good things about his books. And this is the one that Jake bought for me. I think it's the only one by him that he's read as well. So I will definitely be picking this up, and it's so short. I love that I was kind to myself and put some short books on this list this year. So yeah, definitely looking forward to this horror book. I'm not even gonna read the back. I'm not gonna do it. I know that a lot of people enjoy it, and I want to be one of those people. Looking forward to it. And speaking of gifts from wonderful people, I got Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky from my friend Fina over at Fina Reads. So thank you so much, Fina, for this wonderful gift. I'm planning on reading this in February with some people over on the Bookish Drummer Discord, so I'll leave a link to that down below if you want to check it out. But this will be my first from this author, and I've been meaning to read him for so long. And this is definitely his most iconic work, that and maybe like the Brothers Karamazov. So excited about this. Intimidated, but very excited. Another classic I'm planning on picking up in 2025 is Sula by Toni Morrison. So I went back and forth on whether or not to include this one or Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison on this list. And what was ultimately the decision maker was the brevity of this book. Again, I wanted to give myself a hand and put some more short books on this list. So yeah, very excited about this. It's very short. I've heard the writing is gorgeous. I've read a handful of books by Toni Morrison, and The Bluest Eye is one of my favorite novels of all time. So I'm hopeful that I will love Sula just as much, if not more. Who knows? Maybe I will finally replace The Bluest Eye as my favorite Toni Morrison book. We'll see. I'm excited about Sula. Next up is an author that I've been meaning to read for a number of years, and the author is David Mitchell. The book is Cloud Atlas. Again, I went back and forth on which David Mitchell book to put on this list. Between this one and The Bone Clocks were really the two I was thinking of, but Cloud Atlas is the one that people rave about the most, and so I really want to read this. It is the finalist for the Man Booker Prize, and it's iconic. It truly is one of the most iconic books of the 21st century, and so I really want to see what all the fuss is about. I've heard it's a bit postmodern and just a bit experimental and full of magical realism, so I'm very excited about it, and hopefully I love it. Next, we have a book by one of my favorite authors and one of my most anticipated releases of 2025 that I was lucky enough to get an ARC of. That is When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy, who is my favorite currently writing horror author. I can't wait for this, you guys. I can't wait. Can't wait. I love Nat Cassidy's books. I have a whole video talking about his 3 books that I've read. I'll leave a link down below. But there are wolves in this. Werewolves, I assume. And it's supposed to be bloody and violent. And I like Nat Cassidy. So yeah, I'm going to read it. I'm going to love it. That's all I need to know. Just say Nat Cassidy and I'm going to read it. Next up is my second book by John Williams. That is Butcher's Crossing. So I read Stoner a number of years ago, and while I really enjoyed it, I think it's slightly overhyped, maybe. Maybe not. I need to reread it. But anyway, I really want to read Butcher's Crossing by this author as well. This is supposed to be a Western and supposed to be really, really good. I've heard it compared to Blood Meridian, which I also need to read, but I didn't put it on this list. But yeah, Butcher's Crossing. Very excited about it. I don't know too much about it other than that it is a Western. It says it's set in the 1870s. And John Williams. Sold. Next up, we have another author that I really want to delve deeper into their works, and another author who writes some Westerns, but this is a Western, actually, I think. Anyway, it's Bronto by Elmore Leonard. So I really want to read more Elmore Leonard this year. I've read one book by him that the name is escaping me at this moment, but this is the first book of the series. The show Justified is supposedly based on the character from this story, and I've heard so many people say that Elmore Leonard is the master of dialogue, and as somebody who loves to write, I want to study dialogue, so very excited about reading Pronto and getting further into my Elmore Leonard journey. All right, throwing on some of my favorite authors now, we've got Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, who wrote some of my favorite books ever. The Remains of the Day, Never Let Me Go, a handful of others that I've really enjoyed. This is his latest release, but it came out in like 2021, I think, so it's been some time, maybe 22, I don't remember. But yeah, this is a sci-fi book about a doll that is AI, I believe. That's pretty much all I remember about it. But again, if it's Kazuo Ishiguro, I'm immediately interested, and I've heard a lot of people who love his books say that this is one of, if not their favorite, so we'll see if it replaces The Remains of the Day for me. I don't think it will, because I adore The Remains of the Day, but we'll see. I'm really excited about it regardless. Another one of my favorite authors, we've got William Kent Kruger and The River We Remember. This is another historical fiction book set in 1958, this time in Minnesota. And I don't really know too much about this other than that it is a historical mystery, which he typically writes these beautiful historical fiction books that have mystery laced throughout them, but also wonderful coming-of-age stories. He's done it in Ordinary Grace. He did it in This Tender Land, and I know he's going to do it again in The River We Remember. So very excited about this one. I also plan on reading more of his Cork O'Connor books in 2025, but this is my priority, reading this standalone, because I just love his standalones so, so much. Next up, we have Shogun by James Clavell. Depending upon when my January TBR comes out, you may already know that I'll be reading this in January, because one of my lovely subscribers recommended it to me, and every month I'm drawing books to read recommended by my subscribers, and in celebration of hitting 2,000 subscribers, I drew 4 books to read in January, and this is one of them, and it's so big. So it's going to take me a minute. I don't know if I'll finish it in January, but I'm going to try. But this is an epic story set in Japan about an Englishman who gets washed up on the shores of Japan or something like that. It's a war story, a human story, and it's the first in quite a long series as well, but this book in particular is just raved about as one of the greatest novels of all time. So hopefully I'll start the year off with a bang and really enjoy it. That's the plan anyway. Next is a horror novel that I can't wait to read. It's Fever House by Keith Rawson. So yeah, I've heard so many good things about this duology. The second book just came out recently, like toward the end of 2024, and so I snagged a copy of this on Book Outlet, and it's about a disembodied hand that comes to life and starts wreaking havoc. So my jam. I'm very excited about this. I've heard nothing but good things about this book, so hopefully I end up loving it as much as everybody else seems to. Very excited about it. Next up is the first book in a trilogy by an author that I finally read some books of in 2024. The author is Don Winslow, the first book in the series being The Power of the Dog. I read his Danny Ryan trilogy, which is like City on Fire, City something, 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 the City books, the Danny Ryan books in 2024, and while I really enjoyed them, I think I'm going to enjoy these more. These are his magnum opus, the ones that he's really known for. This is book 1, The Power of the Dog, book 2 is The Cartel, and book 3 is, I think, called The Border. It's about the cartel and the war on drugs, and I'm excited about it. I've heard that these books are phenomenal, and I'm excited to finally pick this up. I really was pushed to read these because StoryTubes, which is one of my new favorite booktube channels that I've recently gotten into, they love this book, and so I cannot wait to get in on that hype. It's going to be a great time. Next up, we've got a couple sci-fi books. First up is Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency by Douglas Adams. So if the name Douglas Adams sounds familiar, it's because he wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I love that book. It's so absurd, so fun, such a great sci-fi book. And this is a detective story, like a sci-fi detective story from that guy. Like, what more could I want? This is such a me-coded book, and I hope I love it. I don't know. I don't hear much talk about this book. I know it got turned into a TV show, but I don't hear people talk about this book very much, so I could hate it. I don't think I will, but I'm excited to find out for myself, at the very least. Next, we have Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, and the reason I really wanted to read this in 2025 is because it takes place in 2025, so I feel like I have to read it. I actually wasn't going to put it on my 25 books to read in 2025, though I was hoping to read it. And then I was just looking at it, and I read the back, and I was like, 2020, all right, I got it. I got to read it if it takes place in 2025. So very excited about this. The only reason I hesitate to be excited about it is because there's Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. And originally, Octavia E. Butler was planning on writing a third book to complete the series, but she passed before doing that. And so it's incomplete. But hopefully I can get as much enjoyment out of this as everybody else seems to, despite the fact that it's an incomplete series. The Curse of the Miss Wraith by Janie Wirtz. This book is so thick, you guys. I'm really scared by it, but hopefully I enjoy it. Thank you so much to Nico over at Nico's Book Reviews for getting me this book. I was planning on reading it in 2024, and it got away from me. And then I was like, yeah, I'll read it later in 2025. And then I saw that there's this huge read-along going on for the series called January. Yeah, Nerd Level Rising is the one who finally convinced me to get into it, but of course, Talking Stories as well. Those are some wonderful channels that will be participating in this read-along, so I'm going to read it in January. That's the plan. January. I love that. Next up is The Keep by F. Paul Wilson, my friend over at Bookish Beastie, Bearded Bookish Beast. My guy, he loves this series so much, and so I'm finally going to be giving it a try. I love urban fantasy, and I know this is kind of an intro to the Repairman Jack series. I think this is kind of like a prequel to that series. But anyway, I'm planning on reading it because he recommends it so strongly. He says it's better than the Dresden Files, which, is that possible? I don't know. I'm going to find out for myself, though. So very excited about reading The Keep. Then we have the big classic I want to read in 2025. That's Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. I'm going to read it. That's all there is to it. I'm going to read it. You don't need to know anything about this. It's supposed to be one of the greatest novels of all time, one of the most iconic classics of all time, and I'm going to read it in 2025, I swear. Last two books, you guys, we have Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. This is a novel of Cupid and Psyche. I love C.S. Lewis. I want to read more of his fiction, and this is supposed to be very philosophical and deep and beautiful. And I'm very excited about it. I need to read more C.S. Lewis too, so very excited to be finally doing that. And lastly, we have Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. I want to read more from this author. I've only read some short stories by him, and so I hope that I enjoy this one. It's like a futuristic, quote-unquote, because it's set in 2021, but detective story, and it's what Blade Runner is based off of. I haven't watched Blade Runner, so I'm planning on reading this and then watching the movie. It's going to be a good time. That's all for this video, though. Those are the 25 books that I'm most excited to read in 2025. There are also a lot of series I'm planning on prioritizing, a couple of which were mentioned here, but I'll do a separate video for that in the future. Like I said, please let me know what books you're hoping to prioritize in 2025. Maybe we can read them together. Who knows? Thank you so much for watching, though. I'll see you next time. Bye!